So, hello everybody. Um, I'm Nicholas Pleace. I'm a professor in social policy. I also direct a research centre, the Centre for Housing Policy, which is an interdisciplinary research centre based in what's currently social policy and social work. I started with initially a sort of 9-month appointment as a champion in 2019, and I was happy to be reappointed towards the end of last year. So my talk's going to follow the same structure. Bearing in mind the audience, I'm just going to spend a minute on the end thinking about the intersections between my theme and natural science, so we can maybe get some conversations going about how that might work. So same thing, 4 theme priorities for me. The first is partly justice and equality, but it actually reaches across all the themes. And that's me working with Sarah West, who's director of the Stockholm Environment Institute, on a pan-university research forum for research centres and for research groups. Now, the reason for that is to look at whether or not we can have better integration, better strategic coordination amongst research groups that are often already very interdisciplinary and have been functioning in an interdisciplinary way for a long time, that also work across faculties, that have, because of the direction of travel amongst many of the research councils, have been in the interdisciplinary space for a long time. And we're looking at how we bring together all of those groups across faculty and thinking about what we can learn from them, how we can better support them, and what their role could be in terms of the university's research strategy going forward. So that's the first thing. The second thing is network building within the institution and beyond, and thinking about how those networks should be shaped and formed. I'll comment in a minute and talk about what that means more specifically. The third thing is to simply chase after research funding with me, trying to coordinate a series of interdisciplinary bids over the course of my tenure as a research champion. And the final thing links to our institutional agendas in terms of being a civic university, in terms of our pursuit of the public good. And that's engagement with the city and with the region around justice and equality, and around interdisciplinary work with justice and equality leads or justice and equality components. So where we are now, so we've just literally about 10 days ago had the first meeting of the Pan University Research Group Centre Forum, and we're now thinking about next steps. We did a poll at the end of that meeting using Zoom, and happily 73% of the participants thought we should get together again, so that's got to be a good start. We're going to think about how that should work. I mean, the role of this forum in relation to the champions is all around interdisciplinarity. That's what the champions do. That's what their function is. So our function isn't about research strategy in a broader sense. It's about how we encourage interdisciplinary work across departments, across faculties. And then I'm going to look, from the justice and equality point of view, I'm going to look at how new interdisciplinary networks can extend our research into injustice and inequality, working in sync with wider decolonisation agendas across the university, particularly in relation to teaching, but also in relation to our research. So that's things like gender inequality, it's racial prejudice, intolerance, cultural intolerance, intolerance around sexuality, intolerance around sexual identity, all of those kinds of issues which permeate across everything. So things like justice and equalities issues, as they might, for example, relate to the natural science, include things like gender equality in terms of access to higher education and further education, in relation to postgraduate education, in relation to cultural and ethnic and racial difference and access to education in the natural sciences, all of those kinds of issues for us as an institution and across broader society. So some of that is thinking about what we should do in these spaces. So, you know, in relation to debates around things like Black Lives Matter, where should we be as an institution? What should we be doing in terms of our interdisciplinary research? Some of it's about maybe better organisation of some of the stuff we do and better presentation of it. So, for example, we do a lot on gender inequality, but it's pretty scattered. So we need to think about, are there better ways that we could present and coordinate that? And that kind of goes back to some of the stuff we're doing around trying to get a forum together across various research centres, groups and networks that already exist. Another thing I'll be doing is developing 3 interdisciplinary bids. Looking at poverty in new ways is the first one. So that's going to build on the legacy of social reform in York and Seba and Rowntree. The goal there is to try and look at poverty in a truly interdisciplinary framework. So to leave a lot of the conventions of purely social scientific and other approaches to health, also to address to poverty rather, and also to stop the kind of fragmentation of debate on poverty, so that poverty becomes health inequality, it becomes food insecurity, it becomes fuel poverty, rather than poverty writ large, and seeing about how we can address that and some of the wider issues. And then the final thing is ongoing work with the city and with North Yorkshire County Council. Now, because I'm a housing and inequalities and homelessness researcher, the initial debates I'm involved in there are about the housing futures for the city and for North Yorkshire. But actually that gets you into a load of other stuff. That gets you into what does housing look like in relation to inclusive development, huge issues around sustainability of the built environment and around biodiversity in the built environment, and around things like, you know, how could York in 2040 be a socially and environmentally regenerative city rather than a city that's consuming things and is characterized by inequalities. So what's next? Well, what's next is kind of a mix of stuff that's about to happen and is already happening. So a big thing is going to be around spatial sorting and inequality. So collaborations with environment and geography, with CURB, with the Centre for Urban Research in Sociology, my own group, Centre for Housing Policy, and the network that Nick Carslaw in Environment has built around what's at the moment IBIS, which is the Interdisciplinary Built Environment Seminar Series, with an emphasis on social geography. And social geography is going to be the framework I use for justice and equality. Because so much, particularly, I mean, can we actually say post-COVID yet? But insofar as we can say post-COVID, that's highlight what COVID has done is acted as both a lens and an accelerant on the nature of spatially sorted inequality, climate justice, and issues around human rights. Looking actively at how interdisciplinary research on inequalities can support the engagement of the university at regional and local level. Particular thing there is, can we do stuff within the city and the region that's scalable? You know, it's kind of, what can we do in terms of network building? What can we do in terms of maybe smaller research projects that's got potential legs and can be scaled up into bigger exercises? And you know, can we in some ways emulate the kind of networks that Bradford's been able to build around justice and equality and interdisciplinary research in those areas? I'll just continue to explore the intersections of social justice and human rights and other issues with the other research team champions. And I suppose finally, the other thing I'm trying to think about is, what do we do about neo-reaction? What do we do about the alt-right? What do we do when we're confronted as an institution and as a sector by, if we talk about inequality, we're called snowflakes and liberals who are not drawing attention to the right issues, who are creating false issues around these narratives and so on. You know, this idea that you get Brexit done and so on, and Brexit isn't meaningful, you could argue, in a realistic sense. It's much more about symbology. It's linked back to ideas about empire, ideas around racial intolerance, around cultural intolerance, around all kinds of challenges that we're facing. So that goes to the kind of broader point about how do we protect our research on inequality in a context where it's not going to get any easier to fund it and sustain it. And I think a key issue there is around how we can integrate, how we can pursue interdisciplinarity. So thanks very much.